The following is a CNBC original production.
They can be as fantastic as a faraway galaxy, as real as next door, laid back or action-packed. For a regular Joe, or even a pro, video games make fantasies come true.
Whether that's driving a Formula One race car, whether it's flying a spaceship, skiing down a mountain slope, or snowboarding, or being in a war. They let you do what you always wanted to do.
On the other hand, they've also been blamed for causing real problems.
The ability of our children to access pornographic and violent material on an M-rated video game is spiraling out of control.
To play or not to play? Despite the questions, more and more people are saying yes.
This is not a fad. When you ask people today if they play games, whether they intend to play as much or more in the future, more than half say they expect to play the same amount or more 10 years from now as they do today.
If you add up everything, the sales of hardware and software all across game platforms, the world is now spending $30 billion a year on video games. And the game playing population keeps growing.
I have an Xbox, GameCube.
Not all gamers are nerdy and ugly and have no lives outside of video games. Everybody plays video games. I'm sure like even the hottest of blonde chicks, they'll play Snake on their cell phone when they're bored.
Now, the CNBC original documentary, Game On, the unauthorized history of video games.
Press start now.
Believe it or not, it all began with an atomic scientist. That's right, a nuclear physicist named Willie Higginbotham. In 1958, Higginbotham was working at the Brookhaven National Laboratory on Long Island. Now, a nuclear research lab in the middle of suburbia at the height of the Cold War wasn't exactly a welcome neighbor. But to show its work was harmless, the lab decided to throw an open house. And Higginbotham had a great idea for it.
Willie Higginbotham took an oscilloscope. He built a tennis game into it. He called it Tennis for Two. He wanted something that was exciting and juicy for people to see. So he created this tennis game.
Tennis for Two was the hit of the open house. People waited online for hours for a chance to play the game. But that's as far as it went. After all, how many people have an oscilloscope? Yet the idea of playing games electronically on a screen didn't go away. In the early 1960s, engineering students at MIT became fascinated by computers and what could be done with them. One of those students was Steve Russell.
And he's a member of the Tech Model Railroad Club at MIT, who in 1960 got their hands on a PDP computer, one of the first computers to have a screen on it. And he was the one who came up with, I'm going to do a game. And he created two ships with a kind of a sun in the middle that had gravity, and they flew around and they tried to shoot each other.
Russell called the game Space War. It created a sensation among his fellow engineering students, not just at MIT, but also at other colleges fortunate to have computers then. Still, as smart as he was, Russell didn't have a clue about how to market his game.
It was on a $100,000 computer, so at 25 cents a game, people would only have to play it 400,000 times to pay for the computer to begin with.
But in 1966, a New Hampshire engineer named Ralph Baer, who worked for a defense contractor making electronics for the military,
let's say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5,
came up with the breakthrough that got video games out of the lab and into the living room.
I'd like to introduce you to the brown box.
The answer was right in front of him, right in front of everybody.
Ralph was looking at a TV in the 60s and he was saying, you know, what can you do with a TV besides watch My Three Sons? And he came up with the idea that you could play a game on it.
I scribbled some notes and wrote a 4-page paper, and that was a Magna Carta of the whole video game business. It's all there.
RCA, Zenith, Sylvania, GE. For 2 years, Baer demonstrated his prototype machine to them all until finally in 1971, he found a taker in Magnavox.
Magnavox presents Odyssey.
A year later, the Magnavox Odyssey, the electronic game of the future, made its debut.
There was a combination of absolute amazement and total bewilderment. You have to remember that nobody knew what to expect from a video game. People had no concept of it.
It might have been the iPod of its day if it hadn't been for Magnavox's marketing mistakes.
Right now, when you buy any Magnavox TV,
When they first showed Odysseys in television ads, they showed them, of course, in conjunction with Magnavox television sets. And they worded things in such a way that people got the idea that the Magnavox video game, the Odyssey, would only work on a Magnavox set. Oh, that didn't exactly enhance sales.
The Odyssey seemed destined for the same technological junkyard as 8-track tapes and quadraphonic sound. If making video games was ever to become an industry, what it needed was not another inventor or computer geek. What it needed was an inventor and computer geek who was also part visionary, part hustler. In a warehouse in Silicon Valley, he was already at work.
Coming up, the first video game to become a hit.
They took something like a Pong, you know, a nice little wood cabinet with a flat top, and you could put your beer on there to enable people to say, okay, ping pong, I get this.
That's next, as Game On continues. Now, back to Game On, the unauthorized history of video games.
A quarter, 25 cents. That's all it took to escape all that for this, Pong, the first video game to become a hit.
They took something like a Pong, you know, a nice little wood cabinet with a flat top, and you could put your beer on there to enable people to say, okay, ping pong, I get this.
Nolan Bushnell got it before anybody else. He's the guy who made it all happen, and in the process started an entirely new industry.
He was the first one to figure out how to market it. He looked at it not as a novelty, but as a new genre.
Remember Space War, the original computer game invented at MIT? As an engineering student at the University of Utah, Bushnell was sneaking into the school's computer lab to play it every chance he got. And as he played, he saw opportunity knocking.
Coincidentally, I was manager of the games department at an amusement park, Summers. It was obvious to me that if I had this in my arcades, they'd make a lot of money.
Bushnell took the idea with him as he moved from Utah to Silicon Valley to work as an engineer at Ampex. Using spare parts from work and a used television, he built a coin-operated version of Space War in 1971. The result was Computer Space, the very first arcade video game. As beautiful as it looked, it was a dud.
It was too esoteric. I mean, it made a lot of money around college campuses. Just made no money at all in a beer bar.
Still, Bushnell wasn't ready to declare game over. Instead, he left Ampex and formed a company that would design video games for coin-op manufacturers like Bally and Midway. For the name of his new company, he borrowed a term from the Japanese board game Go, Atari. It means prepare to be attacked. But no one at Atari was prepared for the game that would put the new company on the map. It all started when Bushnell hired a young engineer named Al Alcorn and gave him an exercise to get his feet wet in game design.
The idea was to build a video game that was the simplest possible thing you could think of. So I just went to the Walgreens drugstore and bought a $75 black and white TV.
Bushnell and Alcorn called the game Pong and installed the first Pong machine for a trial run at this bar in Sunnyvale, California, then known as Andy Cap's Tavern. What happened next made Andy Cap's the Los Alamos, the Cape Canaveral of the video game industry.
One day, within the first week, I got a call in the evening saying the machine stopped playing, and could I come down and fix it because I got customers that want to play the game. So I drove down to Sunnyvale and went to see the machine, opened the coin box up, and this big fistful of quarters just gushed out of the machine. All of a sudden, we had a real hit on our hands.
All Nolan Bushnell needed now was a workforce to manufacture the game.
I thought that the way you did it is you went down to the California unemployment office and you said, send me up some workers. I didn't realize that all you got were drug addicts and dope dealers when you did that.
We got some pretty colorful people, some parolees, and yeah, we had some issues, but the company survived those problems and went on to create a kind of a culture that's kind of permeated the valley.
We had a very, very young workforce.
And we'll see how she flies.
We soon found also that they were really more interested in a party than they were in raises or bonuses. And so we would set a quota, and if they hit a quota, we'd have a beer bust on the back dock. We were constantly hitting quota, therefore we had a lot of beer busts.
And there was plenty of money to pay for all those kegs. Within a year, Atari was raking in $1 million from the sales of Pong. But now Atari faced competition of its own as scores of other companies began making rip-offs of Pong.
So the way you stay ahead was to invent the next game. So you'd have that for a while until they copied it.
Atari brought out one arcade hit after another. Asteroids. Battle Zone. Lunar Lander. And a game invented by a hippie kid named Steve Jobs. Yes, the Steve Jobs.
He really was out there in left field. With very strange ideas about diet and water and air and a few other things.
But the game that Jobs and his pal Steve Wozniak created became one of Atari's biggest hits, Breakout. Within a few years, Jobs and Wozniak would break out of Atari to form a little company called Apple.
And he wanted me to invest. And I could have had a third of Apple computer for $50,000. I kind of regretted that.
Actually, Bushnell had enough on his plate running Atari. Every moment of his day was dedicated to finding ways to stay ahead of the competition.
Strong piece of stuff.
The answer, he thought, would be a home version of Pong. Unfortunately, no one else seemed to think so.
We went to the toy fair in New York, presented the first Pong, sold none. Zero.
But then the largest retailer in the world in the 1970s came to the rescue. Sears. They put the home version of Pong in their 1975 Christmas catalog. 150,000 home Pong machines were sold just during the holiday season alone.
Once upon a time, you could give a kid a top and a jump rope for Christmas, or perhaps a small doll. Not anymore.
Within a year, there were 75 companies making their own home video game machines. To stay ahead of them, Bushnell had an idea for a state-of-the-art game console that was actually a computer. What he didn't have was the money to manufacture it.
I did the calculation, how much it was going to cost me to raise the capital and the uncertainty. And I felt that the best thing to do was to sell the company.
And so, in 1976, Bushnell sold Atari to Warner Communications for $28 million.
We thought Warner Communications understood the hit business, the hit music business, the hit movie business, and would understand that some games don't work and some games do. So that was the choice. At the time, it seemed like a great deal.
At first, everything at Atari was the same. As chairman of the board, Bushnell was still coming up with new ideas. Like a chain of restaurants where kids could play video games. Yes, Nolan Bushnell is also the father of Chuck E. Cheese.
Children the world over are the same. They like fun, food, entertainment, and games.
It was a secret trick to open up new locations to sell more video games, is what that was about. Absolutely brilliant. Worked great. Except the pizza was never very good. Engineers didn't make very good pizza.
But the honeymoon between Warner Communications and Nolan Bushnell ended quicker than you can say pepperoni, especially after Warner brought in a former textile executive named Ray Kassar to keep an eye on its new company. By then, Atari had brought out its new game console, the VCS, also known as the 2600, the machine that was supposed to keep the company on top. But after a slow start, Bushnell lost faith in the VCS and tried to get Warner to drop it.
I basically told them that they were a bunch of idiots, and you don't say that to executives.
In 1979, Warner Communications fired Nolan Bushnell and replaced him with Ray Kassar.
Mr. Kassar was quoted as saying how to handle these engineers. He says, "Oh, I've used to them. I worked at Burlington Industries, and they're just like their product fashion designers, high-strung prima donnas. I know how to handle them. They're a dime a dozen." Well, within a week, we had a T-shirt made that said, "I'm just another high-strung prima donna engineer at Atari."
Atari was only as good as its engineers, the geniuses like Alan Miller and David Crane, who created the hit games that drove earnings. And they thought it was about time they got recognition for their talent.
All the work was done by just one person, all the graphics, all the music, all the sound effects, all the programming.
Our best engineers were getting paid $50,000 a year, and they could see that their work that one guy could make in 3 months was generating $20, $30 million of revenue. And they said, "I want a piece of that action."
Not only did they not get a piece of the action, they hardly got any credit.
What specific games have you designed?
Well, at Atari, we don't really like to talk about who designed what.
Why not?
Well, because we like to make the game the superstar as opposed to the programmer.
Why shouldn't you get credit if you design the game?
Well, because it is a corporate product. Okay, these are games by Atari, not games by Steve Wright or some other person.
One of the guys said, "We can get 4 programmers off the street for the kind of money that you're asking for."
It was the final straw. Alan Miller and his fellow designers quit Atari and started their own company, Activision, to make games that would play on the VCS. In its first year of operation, Activision made a profit of $13 million. Pretty soon, other engineers were also leaving Atari to start their own third-party software companies. The video game boom was on. But in it were the seeds of an even bigger explosion that few, if any, in the industry would survive.
Coming up, a Japanese import storms the U.S.
Pac-Man was on the cover of Mad Magazine and Time Magazine. I mean, Pac-Man was everywhere.
But for the video game industry, trouble was lurking just around the corner. That's next, as Game On continues. We now return to Game On.
In 1978, just as Americans were starting to buy Hondas and Toyotas, their kids were spending every cent they had on another product from Japan. A dream come true for any kid who saw Star Wars a zillion times and wished that they could be a Jedi warrior too. Space Invaders.
Space Invaders said, hey, you want to be Luke Skywalker? Here you go. You had this thumping soundtrack with this heartbeat that would get you more and more excited as you played, and these wonderful spacey sound effects.
Fighting Space Invaders' never-ending onslaught of evil aliens became a Japanese obsession.
They had to increase the number of 100 yen pieces they were minting because so many were inside Space Invaders machines at any one time that they were running out of 100 yen pieces.
The yen to play Space Invaders turned out to be just as great in America. By 1979, there were 60,000 Space Invaders machines in the United States, each making $300 to $400 a week. Midway, the coin-op company that brought Space Invaders to America, had invaded the space of Atari, the industry leader, in a big way. Rather than fight it, Atari CEO Ray Kassar hitched a ride into orbit with the game by licensing the home rights.
Ray was the one who looked at Space Invaders and he said, if we made a Space Invaders cartridge for the VCS, I'll bet you that would sell.
It's a bet Kassar won. Sales of the Atari VCS console doubled. And then Japan invaded again with an even bigger blockbuster, Pac-Man.
When they were making Pac-Man, the guy who was leading the project took his team to lunch. They went for pizza in Tokyo, and somebody had taken the first slice of pizza, and then he looked down and there was Pac-Man staring at him.
Japan had started a global epidemic.
Pac-Man was on the cover of Mad Magazine and Time Magazine. I mean, Pac-Man was everywhere.
Towels, ties, T-shirts. So we're talking about a multi-billion-dollar business here.
But not every Japanese video game manufacturer was making it big overseas. A playing card company turned toy and game maker named Nintendo just couldn't get off the ground in America. At the time, Howard Lincoln was an attorney for Nintendo's struggling American division.
They had a huge inventory of coin-operated video games, Radar Scope, which was the name of the game, which were not selling.
But what Nintendo also had was Shigeru Miyamoto. Today, he's considered one of the greatest video game designers of all time. But back then, he was a brand new hire, personally discovered by Nintendo's boss, Hiroshi Yamauchi.
Hiroshi Yamauchi looked at him and said, wow, there's something special about this guy. There's some kind of creativity here that I've never seen before. The guy's going to be a force.
Miyamoto started off by creating something that no other video games ever had, a story.
And I thought of, well, if we have a guy who's chasing after a gorilla who's kidnapped a girl as he goes up, then that would be something that would be very fun.
Not only did Miyamoto come up with a wacky game, he also gave it a wacky name, Donkey Kong.
My idea for the name was to have something that essentially meant dumb monkey. And in Japan, the word Kong is very closely associated with gorillas. And so we took that, and I had, from somewhere or someone, heard that in English donkey means dumb. And so actually the name came about perhaps because of my somewhat limited English abilities at the time.
But Donkey Kong's popularity was unlimited. It became the most popular game in the world after Pac-Man, and Nintendo's first hit in America. Donkey Kong, Pac-Man, and Space Invaders ushered in the golden age of video games. By 1981, Americans had dropped 20 billion quarters into arcade machines. But no golden age lasts forever, and this one ended the way it began, with another alien from outer space. The year was 1982. E.T. was the blockbuster movie of the year. Everybody wanted to cash in on the E.T. craze, and the video game industry was no exception.
Hey! Mr. Intellivision. television.
Before long, there was Henry Thomas, the young actor from the movie, starring in commercials for Mattel's Intellivision game system. Steve Ross, the head of Atari's parent company Warner Communications, had an even bigger plan for exploiting the extraterrestrials' extraordinary popularity.
He wanted to get Steven Spielberg to come make movies for Warner Brothers instead of just being with Universal, where he was with Jaws and E.T.
Cut, great, good. Print that one.
And to show that he could, pardon my language, so he could piss with the big boys, he said, I'll tell you what, I'll give you $25 million for the licensing fee to license E.T. for the Atari VCS.
When Spielberg said okay, Ross ordered Atari to have the game ready by the start of the Christmas shopping season. There was only one problem. That favorite time of year for the kids and their retailers was only 6 weeks away.
And, of course, the game was terrible. It's remembered as one of the worst games of all time, and deservedly so.
On the heels of Atari's worst game came December 7th, 1982. A day that will live in video game infamy.
There may be trouble in Toyland, at least in the video games division. This week, industry giant Warner Communications, makers of Atari, announced that 1982 earnings would be far below previous expectations.
The day of the announcement, Warner's stock plummeted. Atari CEO Ray Kassar tried putting on a brave front.
We've been in the limelight, and any little sneeze, I think, has had a pneumonia impact on the street, but business is still very good.
But the damage was done. Atari lost $350 million and laid off 3,000 employees. And as Atari crashed, so did the entire industry. Mattel, the maker of Intellivision, faced a deficit of $200 million. Coleco was on the verge of bankruptcy. On the coin-op side, Bally Midway saw its profits slide by 85%.
We had this hit product called the Atari VCS. It made billions of dollars. It was a great product, obviously, but it was going to end. Eventually, it petered out. I think every game that could have been made for Atari was made.
And not all of them were hits.
There were a tremendous amount of bad games being made. There were also some very good games being made. But when the market is flooded with an inferior product, you can only burn people so many times.
According to legend, and very well verified legend, Atari took millions of games that just they could not sell. They put them on some trucks, they drove them out into New Mexico, they dumped them in the desert.
With Atari's 18-wheeler funeral procession, the golden age of video games was laid to rest. There were no survivors. Or so it seemed.
Coming up, it's Mario to the rescue.
It had vibrant colors. It had distinct images. Mario looked like a person. He didn't look like a stick figure.
How an unassuming plumber saved the video game industry. Next, as Game On continues. Now, back to Game On.
By 1985, video games were history. But at the Consumer Electronics Show that year, tucked away in a small booth, was the company that brought the world Donkey Kong, Nintendo. The Japanese game maker was exhibiting its latest product, the Famicom, a video game console. The video game business may have died in America, but it was alive and well in Japan. In fact, Nintendo had sold 3 million Famicoms there. Still, that didn't matter much stateside.
All of the buyers thought, this is really slick, really neat, but they would not touch it, even if we guaranteed the sales. It was simply too risky.
Not wanting to scare off any more American retailers than it already had, the company stopped calling the Famicom a video game machine and renamed it the Nintendo Entertainment System, or NES. For good measure, they also added a decoy.
We came up with a robot so that we could tell buyers, and they in turn could tell their superiors, that this was not just a video game system, it was a robotic video game system or some nonsense like that. And it worked.
What didn't work for Nintendo President Hiroshi Yamauchi were the test market plans.
We as Americans were saying, well, you know, you go to some place like Peoria, or wherever they test market products. And he thought that was crazy. He said, I'll give you one chance. You got one shot. You try to introduce this in New York City. And if you can make it work there, then we'll go from there.
During Christmas 1985, Nintendo sold 50,000 units in New York, enough to prove that there was still a market in America for video games. And what really helped sell the NES was the video game included with it, a home version of Nintendo's Japanese arcade blockbuster, Super Mario Brothers.
If you saw Super Mario Brothers on the NES, it didn't look a thing like anything you saw on an old Atari machine. It looked like the arcade game. It had vibrant colors. It had distinct images. Mario looked like a person. He didn't look like a stick figure. You saw clouds and mushrooms and creatures.
It all paid off. In a poll taken a year later, kids across the country were asked what they wanted most for Christmas. Their number one choice, the NES. By 1988, Nintendo had a whopping 90% share of the video game market. The company's domination of the industry got even bigger when it introduced its video game equivalent of Sony's Walkman. And Nintendo had none other to thank for its success than Mikhail Gorbachev. Well, sort of. Right at the end of the Cold War, a Soviet computer engineer named Alexei Pajitnov created a puzzle game called Tetris. When the Iron Curtain lifted, Nintendo got its first look at Tetris and started talking rubles.
And we knew that that could be the killer game on Game Boy, the launch title.
Even with that tiny monochrome screen on a Game Boy, you could show the blocks very efficiently for Tetris. You could distinguish, the shapes and everything, and it was perfect. It was the perfect coupling.
Thanks to Tetris, Game Boy became an instant hit, selling 32 million units in its first 3 years. Nintendo seemed unbeatable.
There is a new addiction in America. Nintendo video games, more than a pastime, more than a passing fancy. For many, a kind of narcotic.
But at that very moment in time, Nintendo's days as the only game in town were numbered.
A new generation of kids were ready to play games again. Those who had played wanted to come back in. Sega saw this and said, there's room for more than one player in the market. If Nintendo can do it, Sega can do it.
A veteran executive of Coleco, Mattel, and Atari, Michael Katz became president of Sega's American division in 1989, just as the company was about to roll out the Genesis game console to replace its unsuccessful Master System.
When I joined Sega, I was told that the only Japanese I would be expected to know was the phrase Yakumandai. And I said, that's interesting. What does it mean? And I was told it meant 1 million units. So that became my marching orders. That became the prayer that I was supposed to give every morning when I woke up and every evening when I went to sleep.
Genesis puts you in the game with the...
To help answer his prayers, Katz went after athletes like Joe Montana to star in games for the Genesis. And he initiated a no-holds-barred ad campaign.
We had to do something drastic. We had to hit hard. We had to go after that 90% of the market was Nintendo.
By 16. Unfortunately, Genesis didn't do as well in America as Sega Japan had hoped.
Ultimately, we only did half a yuck. When I was at Sega, we did 500,000 units.
Out went Michael Katz as president of Sega America, and in charged Tom Kalinske, an executive from Mattel. Before long, Sega had a new hero. No, not Tom Kalinske, Sonic the Hedgehog.
One of the things we bragged about was how fast we could have action on our system, how fast we could move sprites around on the system. And so Sonic was designed to be a very fast-moving character.
And they just did very, very edgy ads.
Hey! You still don't have a Sega CD? What are you waiting for, Nintendo to make one?
The consumer was left with the impression that, you know, if you were cool, you used a Sega system, and if you were a 5-year-old kid, you used a Nintendo system.
All of a sudden, the share started going up, and we went from, you know, literally single-digit share to double-digit share to 20% share to 30% share. At that point, I knew we had arrived.
Yakumandai, 1 million units, was no longer a prayer. It became a reality several times over. By 1992, Sega had captured 55% of the console market. Sonic had beaten Mario, and while the Plumber and the Hedgehog would challenge each other to rematch after rematch, lurking in the wings was a giant who would ultimately trample them both.
Coming up, a new player in the video game called PlayStation.
Sony was saying, look, this is going to replace the PC. It's going to replace the DVD player.
But another technology giant had other ideas. That's next, as Game On continues. Now, Game On continues.
In the 1990s, more and more people were discovering that personal computers were also fun game machines. And when computers started coming equipped with CD-ROM drives, the gameplay got even better.
You know, the game of the year has always been a board game, and this year it's not.
The CD-ROM game Myst sold over 1 million copies.
It's like a novel in which you are participating.
And pretty soon, Nintendo wanted CD-ROM drives for their very own. Nintendo and Sony began exploring a partnership. It seemed like a match made in heaven. Nintendo, the savior of the video game, and Sony, pioneer of the compact disc, joining forces. The plan was for Sony to provide an add-on CD-ROM drive to the NES console. But then came the prenuptial agreement.
Sony wanted the rights to all the software that was made for it. It was on their format, and they wanted control of that. Nintendo became very suspicious. They saw themselves as kind of handing over the keys to the kingdom to Sony.
So Nintendo secretly began talks with Philips, the European electronics company that had co-created the CD. Sony didn't have a clue.
Sony held a press conference and they said, yes, we're partners with Nintendo, we're building this PlayStation. The next day, Nintendo came out with Philips and said, no, we're partners with Philips.
Hell hath no fury like an electronics giant scorned. Sony decided to make the PlayStation console on its own and went on the offensive, stealing away software makers who had been developing games for Nintendo. For game publishers, it was good business. A Sony CD-ROM was cheaper and faster to program and produce than a Nintendo game cartridge.
It took a lot of time to actually manufacture the cartridges. So if you had a hit game, you will obviously want to sell more. The only problem is you can't get those cartridges into the stores for another 3 months because you had a very long lead time.
Games also looked better on PlayStation than they did on either Nintendo or Sega.
It's just like if you were in the game, it just sucks you right in, you know?
The next thing you know, they owned the market. They had a good system, they priced it aggressively, they were the ones who remembered that you were supposed to be giving away razors to sell the blades.
The blades in this case being the games themselves. That's where console makers make their real money.
The guy who controls the proprietary format is the toll keeper. Everybody's got to pay him money to put their product on his machines. It's a licensing business. And if you become the king of the hill, everybody has to salute you. And they have to salute you by writing a check.
PlayStation. All those checks made Sony's revenge not only sweet, but profitable. Debuting in 1995, PlayStation became the world's best-selling game console and was soon generating 40% of Sony Electronics' annual revenues. With Sony the new king of the hill, Nintendo and Sega became pretenders to the throne, reduced to a distant second and third place. By then, Sony's plans for a next-generation PlayStation, the PlayStation 2, had awakened the gaming instincts of another technology giant, Microsoft.
Sony was saying, look, this is going to replace the PC. It's going to replace the DVD player. It's going to be the anchor of your home entertainment experience and can go beyond that as well.
Replacing the PC was not what the leading computer software maker in the world wanted to hear, especially since PlayStation was outselling the top 5 PC makers combined.
The growth of the PlayStation business outpaces the overall industry growth.
The sort of messaging Sony did around PlayStation 2 certainly catalyzed a lot of kind of competitive spirit amongst people at Microsoft who really, didn't particularly enjoy Sony saying that a game console was going to replace Excel, for instance, or Word for Windows.
What Bill Gates at some point said was, hey, look, there's a living room. That's one room in the house we haven't broken into yet.
Just 1 week after Sony released PlayStation 2 in the spring of 2000, Bill Gates broke in.
Well, here it is, the first time it's been seen in public.
Microsoft would be making its own game machine, the Xbox.
Hey, you guys want coffee and donuts?
Its premiere in November 2001 at Toys R Us in Times Square gave New York City one of its first moments of fun after the tragedy of 9/11, with Gates himself on hand to sell the very first one. Since introducing Xbox and its successor Xbox 360, Microsoft has lost $4 billion in its attempt to enter the living room.
It doesn't matter to Microsoft that the Xbox division lost money every single quarter, 4 quarters a year for 4 years. Didn't matter. They were pleased because of the way they saw it. They walked into a market where no one took them seriously. And the next thing you know, they were a player.
That was in the console market. In the handheld market, the king of the hill remained Nintendo with its introduction of the DS system in 2004.
The simplicity is in the interface. It's a pen. Everybody knows how to use a pen. My 3.5-year-old boy knows how to use a pen.
User-friendly also became Nintendo's strategy for regaining a larger piece of the console market in 2006 with its Wii system.
The most interesting thing about the video game business is that each 4 or 5 years there's a new hardware system, so there's a complete reshuffling of the deck. Market shares don't change by a couple of percentage points, they change by 20 or 30 or 40% every 5 years.
It's a horse race. People have their favorite horse. You know what I mean? A lot of people have a dog in the fight. A lot of people are going to make a lot of money, and a lot of people are going to lose a lot of money.
As in the pioneer days of Atari and television and Coleco, one fact remains true. A game machine is only as good as the games created for it.
When I did video games, it was one engineer sitting at a table for a few months, controlling everything. Today's video games, I could no longer do those, and I could make a movie. You know, it's a completely different world.
Who knew what would happen to electronic technology? Could you begin to think of what a microprocessor was going to do for business in 1966, 67? There wasn't even a word, never mind a reality.
I envisioned it becoming large. I don't think I ever felt that it would be larger than the movie industry, theatrical tickets. I don't think I ever foresaw that.
One thing, however, is clear. Video games paved the way for the interactive technologies that we now can't live without. The internet, the iPod, even ATMs.
It's only really now that we're kind of reaching the zenith of this video game culture where everything must be interactive and everything must have some level of interactivity or ability for it, or it's quickly becoming a dinosaur. And so we are living in the video game world now.
Game over.